Hi, Jack and Jesse. Responding here to your theme in recent episodes about big thinking. And I'm particularly responding to your impatience about people that don't get it about electric cars. And you're, of course, absolutely right. And imagine what it's like to be Elon and get these things, since he was 20 years old, and nobody believes you. And then, having to demonstrate it to the extent that he has. And still, when you think, well, okay, you've shown this, you think everyone's going to be on board. And people go deeper into their caverns to make sure they don't see what is increasingly obvious. Imagine how frustrating that is. And so I empathize enormously. But one of the things that goes through my mind is we are all on a bell curve of acceptance of just about everything reasonable. And a bell curve, by definition, begins with a tiny minority, moves to the point where it's the vast majority, and then ends with a tiny minority, because all technology, language, culture, computers, operating systems, software languages, cars, horses, they all go through a bell curve. And at the very beginning of the curve, there's a bleeding edge minority that accepts them. And at the very end of the curve, there is a bleeding, not very bleeding edge. There is a Luddite faction that, is still, the Mormons, I think, are still using horse and buggies. And so there's something of that element. There's a past element. But this is true with everything. And the more informed we are, and that's the real difference, I've now listened to, a good 150 hours of, reading, Ashley Vance's biography on Elon, reading the news, staying up to date with SpaceX. So you and I are informed in a particular area and are, of course, impatient. But I think it's valuable for each one of us to go into those arenas beyond our comfort level, where we are not currently informed. And to that end, I sent Zac a link to 10x Living, because let's flip the roles a moment and imagine that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of arenas in which knowledgeable people are incredibly impatient about you and I's passivity and acceptance of the status quo, be that in education, be that in psychology, be that in therapeutic protocols, be that in health, be that in housing dynamics, be that in immigration policy, monetary policy. So imagine that in every arena within our cult, within our culture, there is a bell curve. And there is right now in every single arena a very tiny meme, a meme that 3 or 4 people, 5 or 6 people, 10,000 people have grasped, and that everyone else hasn't grasped. That everyone else is like, oh, not another thing to think about. That everyone else is like, that's not a priority right now. That everyone else is quite content doing the same old thing as they've been doing before. And I think it's valuable to switch our position. So you're now in the role of teacher for something you know very well. And Tesla's pretty much at the bleeding edge. And yet there is a bleeding edge for Tesla, meaning if Tesla was to freeze this moment in time, in about 10 years, there would hopefully be in the evolution of technology something about 7 times, 10 times better, at a bleeding edge than anything right now. And with Elon's predisposition to continual self-innovation, he's likely to be there if he hasn't gotten fed up with the FUD thrown at him from an entire world, and just said, fuck you, I'll go live on my island. Elon's likely to, be at that bleeding edge because first principles keep taking you there. And that's, at that moment of first principle, one of the first principles that I think has never been framed this way that I've heard, but really makes sense, is the principle of intelligence. And I would invite you to consider this first principle as a basis for engaging. And it's a principle of efficiency. That intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into well-being. And that human intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. And that energy is usefully bifurcated into money, time, and natural resources, that they're all forms of energy. A tree having to cut down to make someone well-being go up is a consumption of a natural resources. Taking 10 hours to improve someone's well-being, you go into, or a massage, you go in, takes 2 hours to create well-being in that person's body through 2 hours of time. And then there's the use of the space and the rent that costs money. So you have time, money, you have natural resources. And there are some recipes that take very little time, very little money, very little natural resources, and create extraordinary amounts of well-being. And we could call that highly intelligent. And there are other recipes, diesel cars being among them, to make extraordinary noise that cost a lot in natural resources, that damage the environment, that cause cancer, that damage human health in other areas, that cost money at the pump. And there's a lot of energy being spent to facilitate transportation while simultaneously dampen the quality of life around that transportation. And if we look at the 5 senses, you look at well-being in each area. So diesel, of course, damages the sense of smell. It damages the body, which one could consider the sense of touch. The taste of diesel in the air is not enhanced. And you have the view, the black smoke and the residual all over the granite columns of a city. Cities spend millions of dollars to sometimes clean, acid wash the facade, primarily from diesel and other, coal and other fumes. Then we have the trillions of subsidies that you mentioned. Now, all of these are carefully compartmentalized in such a way that the people cleaning the city like to look at this as a completely separate decision from the choice to use diesel or electric. So no, this has nothing to do with diesel engines. This has to do with cleaning the city. Let's recategorize things. So things are not looked at holographically, the same as in medicine. So this is a cultural phenomenon. The compartmentalization of things in such an absurd way that you cannot go to your government and say, give me a list of all of the ripple effect and causes to our city of this decision, and how much money you've spent and why this decision was chosen as opposed to this. There's no focus, within a city to being intelligent. And I think in many ways we don't want thinking in our government. When I say we, I mean the majority likes to, elect a Reagan or a Trump who just comes on, makes a little witty remark, and off they go, and does not challenge the cult, does not challenge the cult to think. Whereas, someone that really challenges thinking, Bernie Sanders, if you listen to some of his community lectures, regardless of what you think of his policy, he's challenging kids and people to think. This is not very popular. You have a little bit of both with a Clinton, some thinking, some put on a good show. But charm, we like charming people that say everything's going to be fine, that lie through their teeth. And we'll give them power as long as they'll make us comfortable with their lies. This is a very important thing to understand. How is that intelligent? Meaning we all get to stay asleep and not worry about things that challenge our days and stuff. And on the other hand, we pay a big price for the future. Because you have short-term intelligence, like, if I watch a Reagan show, I'll learn absolutely nothing about anything. I'll have some nice smiles. I'll enjoy my dinner. And continue oblivious with not needing to do anything. So you could say there's intelligence there, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to come out of the dinner feeling like I could sit down and watch football and stuff like that, and not have to do anything else, and not have to think, and not have to research, and it's great. But then, of course, there's a price for that, and that's where you get into the short-term intelligence versus long-term intelligence, going into debt to buy a sports car and then paying it off, versus long-term intelligence, investing in a house or growing a crop or planting trees for next generations, which you have to think long-term. So you have short-term and long-term intelligence. And, what's the percentage of ratios that gets the best value for a civilization over time? So my point is that one of the ways to have humility and develop expertise in dealing with the passionate desire to be ignorant that we have in our population is to understand the arena in which you are passionately excited to be ignorant. Where I'm busy with Tesla. I don't want to talk about education. I don't want to talk about this and that, the other. I've got edits. Get away. I don't want to deal with that. I want to hear that everything's fine, that if everyone just drives an electric car, we'll all happy days. As opposed to, one arena with great, resistance and hemming and hawing, by the skin of its teeth, gradually gets into prominence and is 4 times better than what was there in that arena. And then, oh gosh, that's the end of the lifetime, as opposed to, now there's 1,000 other arenas in the same boat. And so, I think you've done a great job at honoring the devil's advocate voice in your shows. It's very impressive. It shows more patience than I have in many areas. And so when I see you putting on a straight face and giving voice to the status quo persona, like, so this is what we're going to do, and you play that back and forth. It's one of the great gifts of your chemistry. You're one of you is willing to represent the majority, and then the other is willing to teach in that role playing, which avoids the fact that Americans don't like to be taught things. So you have to teach someone else surreptitiously as part of our cultural chauvinism. We don't like receiving in America. So you have to pretend to be teaching someone else so that the audience won't be offended at the idea that you have something to tell them, which, of course, you do. So then you look at the cultural absurdity of the fact that there are other cultures that are 5-10 times more sophisticated, more effective, more intelligent than American cultures that have been going strong for hundreds of years and doing certain things better, but we're not looking at them. And you could look at some of the root seeds in many ways as a cultural phenomena. So my thought is, this is intelligent challenging to you. And statistically speaking, like when I sent Zac the list of 10x living, etc., he didn't, I don't know if he opened it or not. He commented on my landscape work. That's status quo. It's nothing, it's just normal large house, American landscapes. And sure, I do that for a living. But it's not what I'm excited about, because I don't believe in the model. I don't think it's as intelligent as the idea of small personal space multi-dwelling units with shared kitchens, elaborate bathing, etc., shared community resources, because I've done the math. And if I can, borrow your attention, the housing model that we're using in America is 10 times more energy intensive than the transportation model. Meaning, if you do accept the definition of intelligence as the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into human well-being, and that, of course, it's more intelligence to do that sustainably rather than a quick burn and then fall flat in your face, as in, debt and then going bankrupt, or cocaine and then, collapsing, that the efficiency with which people work, live, and share spaces such as kitchens, which, if I do the math, I live in a $4,000 a month American house, and I would say 90% of my resources go unused 95% of the time. I might wander into the kitchen and grab an orange juice or do this at 4 a.m. for all of 10, 15 minutes, and then unused for another 6 hours. And that's a huge infrastructure. And, park my car in a parking area that then goes unused. And you've talked about that in reference to Tesla. But there is a chance for a 10-fold reduction of energy while simultaneously a 10-fold expansion in human well-being. So a 10-fold reduction in cost, a 10-fold reduction in natural resources, and an expansion in human well-being simultaneously. Now, that's a bigger proportion of energy than the automobile, but it's not being addressed. It's touched on, meaning that I paid a lot of attention to electrical engineering and Tesla Powerwalls to have such a modular design be 100% solar, to use composting toilets and sewer in a way that we're regenerating the land, as opposed to continually funneling tax money to local governments to, spend lots of money not regenerating the land with sewer, in fact, to pollute the oceans. That water is coming from the land and being amplified, etc., as opposed to, being piped off into the bay, etc. I live in San Francisco Bay Area. And so the question is, can you enter into, domain of exploring these larger ideas? And how far can you go before it doesn't matter how good the idea is, you don't want to hear about it because you're busy with Tesla? Because everyone's got that thing they're focusing on. And for most, of course, it's not Tesla, which is why they're manipulatable with the shorts. The shorts will have a vested interest. I'm sure you've done all the math on all the people that have a vested interest, and why the TV companies have a vested interest on car companies that spend, billions a year on the TV company. And I'm sure you understand the backroom dialogue of, we're going to spend the most of our advertising money with whatever network, dishes out the shit on Tesla. Every negative story on Tesla, you get an extra $500,000. How about that? And this is not on the record, but just so you know. Of course, you're going to get absurd, shift in dynamic, and similarly all the bribery in Washington, etc. So, and you're doing a wonderful job presenting that. But my question and invitation to you, particularly in response to the impatience with which you are, particularly Jesse, the impatience of, come on, guys, why don't you get this, is to flip roles and to step in. Now that you've gotten this, can you go into some area that you don't get, where you're not the expert, but that there is a 5 to 10 times improvement that should be and could easily be done now, but that is not being done because people like ourselves don't have the bandwidth to learn about them and support those people. Meaning there are Elons who are not very Elon personality types. There are, shy scientists that absolutely know a tenfold way to help this or that, the other, that are unpopular in their departments because they tell the truth, just like Elon is unpopular. And they're not getting attention. And my question is, do you feel the bandwidth to step out into a wider conversation about this point of change, in the understanding that there's no perfection? There is, at any moment in time, a new technology in every field, or could be, that is 10 times better than what was done before. And there is the same dynamic around that, the same politics, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, governmentally, commercially. There is the same politics as the politics in your mind right now around this possibility. Is it known? Who's this guy? Why should we talk to them when we're we talk with important people? This, that, and the other. There's the exact same politics going on. And by definition, intelligence, the bleeding edge, is always in the hands of a very tiny minority. That's what makes it the bleeding edge. And the question is, how does it go to be a majority? And I'm interested in, the reason I started my nonprofit was I see, there's no place that I can go that gives me a menu to spend 10 minutes a day that would champion the things I care about the most and learn how I could be potent as a nonprofit contribution. I can't go to a menu right now that says, okay, you love rainforests, here's the most potent 10 minutes you can spend to help rainforests that's time sensitive and leverage. Or here's the most potent way on the planet to spend $10 today that would help rainforests. I can't go to that menu right now because I don't know where it is. So that's one of my dreams in Happiness Data, is to create such a menu that leverages time and passion and to connect it with all the FUD data out there. Because FUD raises the adrenaline and says, oh, the world's coming to an end. And then it's like, okay, I've got 10 minutes. I want to do something. Okay, what do I do? There's no link into, okay, here is the most efficient thing with someone of your talents, your resources, your skills can do in this arena. That doesn't exist. And so all those, adrenaline pops that are going on in, the hundreds of thousands around the globe at any point are being wasted by not being channeled. And it actually builds cultural trauma because people get traumatized by this constant message, the world is coming to an end, and then the biology of the body says that until you do something in response that your body can recognize as a response, you stay in a slight low-grade chronic anxiety. And then we have 20% depression and the trillions that costs, economically, etc. So my invitation to you is to have a 3-hour conversation open table with the goal of opening some of these memes up, these possibilities. One, the goal of expanding our own awareness in areas. You've got knowledge, expertise, talents that I do not have. I have knowledge, expertise, and talents that you don't have. Synergy is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. When you take, this isolated battery, it's completely useless until you've got wires. And then those are completely useless until you've got a light bulb. You put those two together and suddenly you've got a synergy. Light is bigger than just a lunk of battery or a lunk of wires or a bulb that doesn't, light up. You have a synergy when you combine resources like that. And I'm interested in this on a number of levels. It's like, because we can record the 3-hour, open table, exploration around this focus. And that can be available. And maybe one idea sparks for this person or that person, etc. One of the things that I'm dreaming about for happiness data is open source media as follows, where anyone can upload media and put keywords in it. And then any documentarian for the next 20 years can freely download that media without having to worry about all these copyright crap, because when it's for human well-being, these are not commercial projects of how I can make the next buck. And that's why I pay so much attention to Elon. He didn't come into this as to what's the biggest odds of making a buck. He came into it with, I think, one of the most important questions. What does humanity need more than anything else, and how can I serve in that goal? I think that's an incredible learning. I think that's the most important question that you and I can ask. What does humanity need most, and how can we, with our skills, predispositions, talents, facilitate that happening? And that's why Elon has my heart. That's, why I pay attention. That's why I consider him the most interesting news in business. Is if he can crack how the many, every adolescent goes through an idealistic phase, and we just scoff at it and waste it, in high school as if that's somehow preparing one to play an important role in life. We waste it if we can have recipes that allow people in that flare of passion to become closer to Elon and actually do something with it and collaborate and not make it so punishingly painful. I mean, it's literally a bed of nails from birth for Elon. Of course, you only have 1 in 300 million Americans. Who wants to go through that amount of shame and pain and crap and 100-hour weeks? Of course. But if we can get the Elon recipe down to 50 hours a week rather than 100 hours a week, suddenly I think there'd be 3 times more Elons. But we have to work together to synergize more. I've read Elon's biography. It's he is an exceptional person doing an exceptional thing in a hostile soil. If you're a gardener, as I am, you don't change the seeds and you don't lecture seeds. You better grow well in this soil. You amend the soil and water it, and suddenly you go from 1 seed germinating per 300 million, 1 Elon in America, to suddenly you have 100 seeds, 100% of the seeds germinating because you've created fertile soil, which means that the soil is more important than the seed, which is the opposite of what we focus on in America. We don't focus on changing the culture, the soil. We focus on lecturing and shaming and blaming the seed, the individual. You will never get a prosperous culture, by having poor soil, poor water, poor fertilizer and pesticides, and good seeds. The seeds are born healthy, just like they've been throughout history. But by the time they've gone through American soil, most of the goodness is blocked out. How does that happen? So anyway, I would invite you to participate. We can both record it, and it can go on the media site, etc., and be part of the just general protocol. Anyone who wants to do something good for human beings has access to edit and work with this media. You, doing great things for human beings, can edit it down to anything you want and use it or not use it. Maybe it doesn't fit into your model. Fine. Maybe you're just a little bit richer or a little bit more empathic about all the people that don't want to listen to you after you figure out, all the things you don't want to listen to, that I've been researching, etc. And you're like, oh, yeah, well, everyone has their saturation point. And so that's my invitation to you in response to the impatience of people not thinking big, in response to your efforts and dreams of thinking big, in response to your generosity in serving all of these, subjects, in response to your incredible public service in championing a lone seed to get through all the toxicity, all the hostilities and, barrages of the environment to actually deliver the fruits. And that's, of course, the biggest joke on all of us, is that, the fruits that Elon brings are what America needs more than anything else, which is why it's so self-hating that we as a culture, consistently, attack. And you can see that, the biggest shorted stock in America, the constant fear and doubt, the unbiased media, the unscrupulous behavior of business people, an abusive father, bullies at school, all of his friends ganging up to say, watch all the rockets failing, you shouldn't do anything. Why don't you just go off and be an addict like every other billionaire? And, this continuous barrage, continuous, exaggerating everything he does wrong 10 times, stressing him out like mad, and then when he makes careless tweets, which anyone does with, try working in a 100-hour week, then, blame him for being a bad example. He smokes some weed, and rather than criticize the U.S. government for wasting tax revenue by not taxing and legalizing, by criminalizing at $80,000 a pop, millions of Americans for weed, for honestly teaching drug facts for the last 40 years, for breaking up trust in government and, inventing science, bribing science. You could throw the riot book at the U.S. government for its petty incompetence and betrayal and stupidity of the U.S. public around the psychedelic and drug laws with weed, or let's attack Elon Musk for actually taking a puff of something that should never have been illegal in the first place. You have the stupidity of protect the ogre and punish the child, And so anyway, if you'd like to do this, we can set up a time. 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. is my good window in Pacific time. Last minute works pretty well. It can be a mix of Skype and video and stuff, and we can combine, footage. And if anything comes of it, great. If not, we'll be a little bit richer in knowledge and thought. I hope I can offer something to you in thanks for the heartfelt encouragement that you've offered to me, and I will leave it at that. Take care.